The ring was perfect, a delicate band of white gold with a single, modest diamond that caught the light just right, sparkling like the future I thought Mia and I had stitched together. I'm Ethan, and a few weeks ago, I was sure I had found the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. The engagement was a small celebration, just the two of us at that little Italian place where we'd had our first date. Mia's eyes lit up when I slipped the ring on, and for a moment, everything made sense. We laughed, we dreamed aloud, and I felt an overwhelming certainty that this was where I was meant to be. But life has a cruel way of unraveling the best laid plans. It started with a message, a single notification that seemed innocent enough. I was scrolling through my phone late one night when a friend's name popped up, followed by a cryptic, "You need to see this." I hesitated, my fingers trembling slightly as I tapped the link. What I saw felt like a punch to the gut. Photos of Mia, not with me, but with someone else. Close, too close. The kind of proximity that no fiancé should share with another person. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, maybe old pictures, or something taken out of context. But as I scrolled through the messages and images, the truth settled over me like a cold fog. She had cheated. The world shifted beneath my feet. I sat frozen on the couch, the screen's glow casting harsh shadows on my face, heart hammering in disbelief. I tuned out the soft hum of the city outside, the ticking clock on the wall, the steady rhythm of my own breathing. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't she told me? The questions spun endlessly, each one sharper than the last. My mind replayed every moment since the engagement, her smiles, her laughter, the warmth in her eyes. Had it all been a lie? That night, I confronted her. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the silence thick and suffocating. Mia's eyes flickered with something I couldn't name: guilt, fear, or maybe regret, but she didn't deny it. The confession spilled out in a rush, words tumbling over each other as she tried to explain. "It wasn't supposed to mean anything," she said. "It was a mistake. A moment of weakness." But her voice was hollow, and I heard the truth beneath the rehearsed apologies. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal. "I can't do this," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. The ring felt heavy on my finger, a cruel reminder of what I was losing. Mia reached out, but I pulled back, the distance between us growing into a chasm impossible to bridge. I packed my feelings into the silence that followed, each second stretching unbearably long. The engagement was over, shattered by a truth that I wasn't ready to face. In the days that followed, the house felt emptier than ever. The echoes of our laughter were replaced by the sharp sting of absence. I wandered through the rooms, touching the surfaces, as if they might hold some memory to cling to, but all I found was cold reality. Friends called, offering sympathy wrapped in awkward silences, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. The world outside moved on, but I was stuck in that moment of betrayal. Sleep was elusive. Nights were spent staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the images that haunted me, the closeness she shared with someone else, the promises now broken. I questioned everything about us, about myself. How had I missed the signs? Was I too trusting, too blind? The pain was raw and relentless, a gnawing ache that refused to fade. I kept replaying the engagement day in my mind, the way Mia's hand had felt in mine, the sparkle in her eyes as she said yes. Was it all just a cruel performance? The disbelief was suffocating, and I found myself drifting between anger and sorrow, unable to find solid ground. The hardest part was the silence between us. Mia disappeared from my life as quickly as the truth had come to light. No calls, no messages, no attempts to explain or mend. It was as if she had vanished, leaving me alone with the wreckage of what could have been. The absence was deafening, and I realized that what hurt most wasn't just the betrayal, but the sudden void where our future had once lived. Days blurred into nights, and I found myself retreating further, shutting out the world. My friends' faces became distant, their voices muffled by the walls I built around my heart. I wasn't ready to face the world. I wasn't ready to face myself. The man who had proposed with hope and love was gone, replaced by someone hollowed out and uncertain. Yet, beneath the pain, a quiet ember of resolve began to kindle. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I had to find a way through this. I had to learn to trust again, trust in myself, in the possibility of happiness beyond this heartbreak. But that was a future I couldn't see yet. For now, I was trapped in the ruins of a dream, struggling to find the strength to stand. The engagement ring still rested on my dresser, a silent witness to the collapse of everything I thought I had. I looked at it every day, the weight of it, both a burden and a reminder. It was a symbol of love turned to ashes, but also a testament to the fact that I had dared to believe in something beautiful. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward healing. In the quiet moments, when the world was still and the pain was sharpest, I allowed myself to imagine a different life, one where trust wasn't shattered, where love wasn't a fragile house of cards. For now, it was just a flicker, a distant hope glimmering through the darkness, but it was enough to keep me going, enough to remind me that even in betrayal, there could be a beginning. The days stretched on, each one blending into the next like waves in a restless sea. I became a ghost in my own life, wandering through familiar places that now felt foreign and empty. I'm Ethan, and after the engagement shattered, so did everything I thought I knew about myself. Mia was gone, not just physically, but completely erased from my world. No calls, no texts, no explanations, just silence. The first week was the hardest. I locked myself inside the apartment, pulling the curtains tight against the world outside. The city's noise was a distant hum, irrelevant to the storm raging within me. I barely ate, barely slept. I would find myself staring at the ceiling for hours, eyes wide open, replaying every memory with Mia, the laughter, the whispered promises, and the sudden realization that it had all been a lie. Friends tried to reach out, their messages piling up on my phone like unopened letters. I didn't have the energy to respond. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear their voices, to face their pity or their well-meaning advice. The isolation felt safer than the uncertainty of any conversation. I told myself it was just temporary, that I needed time to process. But the truth was, I was drowning in the quiet, trapped in a cycle of grief and anger that seemed endless. Mia's disappearance cut deeper than the betrayal itself. The absence of her voice, the lack of any attempt to make amends, left a hollow space that screamed louder than any accusation. I kept waiting for her to show up at my door or send a message explaining everything, but the silence stretched on. It was as if she had erased me from her life as thoroughly as she had from my heart. In those lonely hours, I wrestled with my own doubts and fears. Was I blind to the signs? Had I been foolish to believe in us so completely? I questioned my judgment, my worth, and the very foundation of my trust. The pain was raw and unrelenting, but beneath it, a small, stubborn part of me refused to give in. Week 2 brought a slow, painful clarity. The initial shock began to fade, replaced by a dull ache that settled in my chest. I started to see that retreating into myself wouldn't heal the wounds. The pain was a reminder that I was still alive, still capable of feeling deeply, even if that feeling was heartbreak. I realized that if I wanted to find peace, I had to confront the emptiness rather than hide from it. I forced myself to answer some messages, to meet a friend for coffee even when I felt like collapsing under the weight of everything. It wasn't easy. Each interaction felt like carrying a heavy load, but it was necessary. I needed to remind myself that I wasn't alone, that there were people who cared. Slowly, I began to open up, sharing fragments of my story with those who listened without judgment. The nights were still long and restless, but I started to establish small routines to anchor me. Morning runs became a way to clear my mind, to push through the fog of despair. Cooking simple meals replaced the nights of takeout and silence. These small acts of self-care were like lifelines, fragile but real. By the third week, the fog had lifted enough for me to think about the future, not with Mia, but on my own terms. The idea of starting over was daunting, but it was also a spark of hope. I made plans to travel, to reconnect with old friends, to explore parts of myself that had been buried beneath the weight of the broken engagement. I found myself reflecting on what trust really meant, not just in others, but in myself. The betrayal had shaken me to the core, but it also forced me to reevaluate my boundaries and the kind of love I deserved. I vowed to be more cautious, but also more open to the possibility of healing. There were moments when the anger flared, sudden and fierce. I would catch myself replaying the images of Mia's betrayal, the sting of her absence, the sharp edges of my own disbelief. But those moments grew shorter, less consuming. I began to understand that anger, while natural, couldn't be the foundation of my recovery. Instead, I focused on acceptance, the hard truth that some things couldn't be changed, no matter how much I wished otherwise. Mia's choice to disappear was hers, and while it hurt deeply, it was a part of the story I couldn't rewrite. I started journaling, pouring my thoughts onto the page in messy, unfiltered bursts. Writing became a way to untangle the knots in my mind, to face the pain without fear. Each entry was a step forward, a small victory over the silence that had threatened to swallow me whole. With time, I began to reclaim my space. The apartment, once a tomb of memories, slowly transformed into a place of possibility. I rearranged furniture, bought new books, and filled the shelves with things that sparked joy rather than sorrow. It was a physical reminder that I was moving on, even if the emotional scars remained. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker, I realized something profound. Mia's absence, painful as it was, had forced me to confront parts of myself. I'd neglected the fears, the hopes, the resilience I hadn't known I possessed. The breakup had torn apart a dream, but it also opened space for a new one to grow, one that belonged solely to me. I'm not healed yet. Some days the weight of betrayal still presses down, and the silence still echoes. But I'm learning to live with it, to carry it without letting it define me. I'm starting to believe that trust can be rebuilt, not just in others, but in myself, and that maybe, just maybe, there's a future worth embracing, even if it looks nothing like the past I thought I'd have. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time, breaking free from the shadows of heartbreak and stepping into the uncertain light of what comes next. It's a slow process, filled with setbacks and small victories, but it's mine, and that makes all the difference. The message came like a sudden storm on a quiet day, unexpected, unsettling, impossible to ignore. I'm Ethan, and years had passed since Mia vanished from my life without a word, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and unanswered questions. I thought I'd close that chapter, that the wounds had begun to heal. But then her name appeared on my screen, a lifeline thrown across the years, shaking the fragile peace I'd built. Can we talk? I need to explain. Please? My heart pounded as I stared at the words, a mixture of disbelief and something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The message was simple, but it carried the weight of everything we'd left behind. For a moment I hesitated, frozen between the urge to block the past out forever and the curiosity that gnawed at the edges of my resolve. Mia, the woman who had shattered my trust, who had disappeared without a trace, was reaching out, vulnerable, remorseful, seeking forgiveness. Or at least, that's what the message suggested. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't imagined she would come back, not after so many silent years. I sat with the message for hours, the glow of my phone, the only light in the room. Memories flooded in, the laughter, the heartbreak, the long nights spent wondering why she left. Part of me wanted to push her away to protect the fragile new life I'd started to build. Another part, a quieter, more fragile part, wondered if there was something left to salvage. When I finally typed back, my fingers hesitated over the keys. Okay, let's talk. The days leading up to our meeting were filled with restless anticipation. I found myself replaying possible conversations in my head, preparing for a confrontation that could reopen old wounds or maybe, just maybe, begin to close them. I wondered what she would say, how she would explain the silence, the betrayal, the years lost. When the day arrived, I was a tangle of nerves and unresolved emotions. We chose a quiet cafe, neutral ground, where the past couldn't easily creep in. She was there when I arrived, sitting alone at a small table, her eyes searching mine with a mixture of regret and hope. The woman before me looked different, older, quieter, marked by time and experience, but the memories were still raw between us. She spoke first, her voice trembling with honesty I hadn't expected. She told me about the mistakes she'd made, the pain that had driven her away, and the regret that had haunted her every day since. She confessed that leaving me had been the hardest thing she ever did, but she had been lost in her own turmoil and didn't know how to face the consequences. I listened, torn between the old hurt and the sincerity in her words. It wasn't easy. Each sentence was a reminder of the trust that had been broken, the future that had been stolen. But beneath the surface, I could see the person she had become, the woman who was asking for a chance to be heard. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back the pain that still lingered. I asked about the silence, about why she had disappeared without a word, why she hadn't tried to make amends sooner. Her answers were shaky but truthful. She admitted fear and shame had kept her away, that facing me had felt impossible until now. The conversation was raw and difficult. We peeled back layers of hurt and confusion, exposing wounds that had never fully healed. There were tears, pauses heavy with unspoken words, and moments when the weight of the past threatened to overwhelm us both. But there was also a strange kind of relief, an acknowledgement that the silence between us had finally been broken. For the first time in years, we were talking openly, honestly, without masks or pretenses. As the meeting drew to a close, I realized that while I could accept her remorse, some scars ran too deep to be erased by apology alone. The hurt was still there, a reminder that trust once broken is not easily mended. I wasn't sure if forgiveness was possible yet, or if we could ever truly reclaim what had been lost. But I knew this conversation was a start, a step toward understanding, if not reconciliation. Walking away from the cafe, the weight of the past still hung heavy, but so did a flicker of something new possibility. The future was uncertain, tangled with pain and hope in equal measure. I wasn't ready to forget, nor was I ready to close the door completely. For now, I was left with questions, and the fragile hope that maybe, in time, we could find a way forward separately or together. The path ahead was unclear, but at least it was no longer shrouded in silence. The cafe was quieter this time, the hum of soft music and distant conversations filling the space between us. I'm Ethan, and after years of silence, Mia and I sat across from each other again, this time with more than just memories hanging in the air. The conversation we were about to have wasn't easy. It was raw, honest, and it demanded confronting truths that neither of us wanted to face but both needed to. She looked worn, eyes shadowed by pain and regret, but there was a sincerity in her gaze that made it impossible to turn away. Mia began to speak, her voice low and steady, as she unfolded the story behind her actions, the reasons that had pushed her to betray me and then disappear without a trace. It wasn't just about you, she said, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I was struggling with myself, with things I couldn't handle. I thought if I ran away, I could fix whatever was broken inside me, but I was wrong. Her confession wasn't an excuse, but a glimpse into a pain I hadn't seen before. She told me about the nights she spent wrestling with guilt, the isolation she'd felt, and the fear that kept her from reaching out. It was a narrative I hadn't expected, one that complicated the black and white picture I'd painted in my mind. I listened, my own emotions swirling: anger, sorrow, confusion. When it was my turn, I didn't hold back. You left without a word. I said, voice tight with the weight of years lost. You broke everything we had. How do you expect me to just forgive that? Her eyes welled with tears. I don't expect anything. I just want you to know the truth. I was scared. I didn't know how to face you or myself. The conversation unfolded between us like a fragile dance, each step revealing more of the wounds beneath. We spoke about trust, how it's built slowly and shattered in an instant. I demanded honesty, not just about the affair, but about the silence that followed. She answered with quiet vulnerability, acknowledging the damage caused and the pain inflicted. There were moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable. Silence would fall heavy, our eyes locking in shared understanding and unspoken grief. The past was a shadow neither of us could escape, but facing it together felt like the only way forward. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or erasing the hurt. It was about acknowledging the pain, accepting the flaws, and deciding whether to let go or hold on. Some wounds, I understood, would always leave scars. As the afternoon light faded and the cafe began to empty, I looked at Mia and saw not just the person who had betrayed me, but someone who had been broken too, someone who had made mistakes and was now trying to make sense of them. I can hear your regret, I said softly. But trust, that's something we lost a long time ago. I'm not sure we can get it back. She nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. I don't expect us to be the same. I just hope we can be honest. We parted with no promises, no illusions of a perfect reconciliation. Just two people who had faced the truth and were left to navigate the complicated aftermath. Walking away, I carried the weight of our conversation, a mix of closure and lingering questions. The path ahead was uncertain, but at least the silence was broken and the truth was out in the open. I watched her walk away from the cafe, the weight of years pressing down on my chest like a stone I couldn't lift. I'm Ethan, and after everything, the betrayal, the silence, the confrontation, I knew one thing with painful clarity. Forgiveness was mine to give, but reconciliation was not. Mia's footsteps faded into the crowd, leaving me standing at a crossroads where hope and heartbreak tangled in a fragile, uneasy knot. I had chosen to forgive not because I was ready to forget, but because carrying the bitterness any longer would have crushed what was left of me. Forgiveness wasn't a gift for her, it was a release for myself, a way to let go of the poison that had seeped into my bones. But that release didn't mean opening my heart to her again, didn't mean rebuilding what had been broken beyond repair. We had spoken honestly, faced the harsh truths that years of silence had hidden. Mia had admitted her mistakes, her fears, her regrets. I had told her the pain she caused, the trust that was shattered like glass beneath our feet. And in that raw exchange, something shifted, not a rekindling of love, but a mutual understanding of what was lost and what could never be reclaimed. I chose to move forward alone, not out of spite or anger, but because I needed to reclaim myself. The years we lost, the dreams that crumbled, were wounds I had to heal on my own terms. I needed to rebuild from the ashes, stronger and wiser, with lessons etched deep into my soul. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into new routines, early morning runs that cleared the fog from my mind, quiet evenings filled with books and music that spoke to the parts of me still aching for peace. I reached out to old friends I'd neglected, rekindling connections that reminded me I wasn't alone. Each day was a step away from the past and toward a future I was determined to shape for myself. There were moments when the past clawed its way back, unexpected pangs of sadness, flashes of anger, the hollow ache of what might have been. But I met those moments with a steady resolve, reminding myself that healing wasn't linear, and strength often came wrapped in vulnerability. One afternoon, a message arrived from a mutual friend. Mia had been asking about me. The words stirred something unexpected, a flicker of curiosity perhaps, or a quiet satisfaction that I had survived, that I had not been defined by the betrayal. I didn't respond. Instead, I smiled to myself, knowing that my story was no longer theirs to write. I boxed up the remnants of the life I once envisioned with Mia, the pictures, the gifts, the memories that had become too painful to keep. As I sealed the last box, I whispered a quiet farewell to the past, to the man I was, and to the love that had taught me the harshest lessons. Standing by the window, I watched the city pulse with life, a reminder that endings are also beginnings. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was mine to claim. And in that uncertainty lay freedom, the freedom to live a story written by my own hand, shaped by resilience, hope, and a heart brave enough to love again, on my own terms. If you love the story, like the video and subscribe.